Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and today we are breaking down the top prospects in the Southeastern Conference. That's right, the SEC. It's going to be a fun episode. Really good discussion with both Ben Fennell and Tony Pauline in our Draft Buzz segment. Really just going through some of the top players in the entire country. We know the SEC churns out NFL talent year after year after year, and this year is no different. A little bit of an abridged show this week, just Draft Buzz, but a really fun discussion covering some of the top players in college football. Let's get things started in Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Well, back once again here for a big day on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We're talking with Tony Pauline, a draft analyst, draft insider. Tony, once again, thank you. Let's get right down to business. Top player in the SEC. Let's hear it.
You know, when we did our Big Ten, it was all mostly Ohio State guys. When we did the ACC, it was mostly Clemson guys. We're doing the SEC, and we're going to go back to Alabama. My number one guy on my board in the SEC, which is Alabama heavy, is linebacker Dylan Moses. I think this guy is NFL ready. I think he's a tremendous three-down defender in all aspects of the game. He's a tough run defender. He's good on the blitz. He's sensational in space. Gets depth on his pass drop, shows ball skills against opposing tight ends. I mean, 3rd and 5, you can leave him on the field to defend the run or defend the pass. There really isn't too much this kid can't do. My only question is, what are his true measurables? You know, is he going to be over 6'2"? Is he going to be over 230 pounds? That really doesn't seem to matter all that much these days at the linebacker position. But when you watch when you watch Alabama on film, you know, number 32 is omnipresent in all facets of the defense. He's my number one prospect in the SEC.
You know, I had a chance to see Dylan Moses up close a couple years ago after Les Miles got fired. Just coincidentally, I did the Alabama game the next week, and it was loaded up with IMG kids. So I was just up close and personal with Dylan Moses, who at the time was just listed as an athlete in recruiting circles. You didn't know if he was going to be a running back, an edge rusher, an off-ball linebacker, maybe an oversized safety like a Cam Chancellor. Ended up nestling at the linebacker position, where I think suits him well, can come down into the box and obviously use his speed and athleticism. But the way he was built, he's just an absolute freight train of a player. I did not know where this kid was going to play on the field. I immediately had to look him up and was like, oh, this kid's going to be somebody. So
and he never redshirted. He played right away.
I believe so, yes.
All right, so I'll talk about another guy who played right away, same class, coming in the 2017 class, and that's Jerry Jeudy, the reigning Fred Biletnikoff winner, as the top receiver in the country. 6'1", just over 190 pounds. Freak show in terms of his body control, his quickness, his ability to set up defenders mid-route. He's great after the catch, can line up inside, outside. I had a lot of trouble finding a weakness for Jerry Jeudy. I really, really loved everything I saw from this kid. He can stretch the field vertically. He can work over the middle. He's tough. He's competitive. This kid, he's the total package. He's just not the biggest guy. He's not Julio Jones from a size standpoint, but I love Jerry Jeudy. Love him on film.
You know, I'm glad you bring up Jerry Jeudy, so that gives me opportunity to bring some attention to his teammate, who I feel like is completely overlooked. Jerry Judy's outstanding receiver, as you mentioned. He has obviously all the tape and Biletnikoff Trophy and the 1,300 yards in the SEC. Yep. But let's not forget about Henry Ruggs on the other side, who was the top wide receiver coming out of high school in the same class and has a confirmed sub-4 340.
Yep.
Has been voted one of the more competitive players on the team.
Yep.
Has played inside, has played outside. He has the speed. Was a track star in high school. Was a Metro Track and Field Athlete of the Year. Ran the 100 meters. He's a punt gunner. Very, very competitive. He hustles all over the field. He's got good adjustments on passes. He's twitchy. He's got balance in the open field, can really absorb tacklers and bounce off them. I had a chance to see him in person against Arkansas last year, and where Irv Smith had a lot of those big plays. Irv Smith actually had a 50, 60-yard play, fumbled at the end, and it was Henry Ruggs down the field, hustling, trying to find blocks, conveniently fell on the fumble, ran in for the touchdown. That's a kid you want on your football team. So in the combination with his speed, his receiver ability, his competitiveness, his ability to play special teams, this is a very, very well-rounded receiver. So as good as Jerry Jeudy is, let's not forget about his teammate.
And then they got a sophomore in Jalen Waddle coming back.
And Devontae Smith. There was another receiver in that class. So, again, in that similar conversation about the production share, just because he's maybe not dominating the yardage on the team doesn't mean he's not a dominant receiver.
All right, well, let's go to the top offensive senior, because all these guys underclassmen. Tony, top offensive senior in the SEC. Who you got?
Well, Fran, as you well know, I have a great history of butchering names. So here's my first one for the season, and the season hasn't even begun. But it's going to be Prince Tega Wanago of Auburn, the offensive tackle, who, when I watched him, I know he had a lot of hype. I spoke with scouts who thought that he stamped him as a mid-first round choice with the grade this early in the season. And everything I saw on film basically lived up to met those expectations. Excellent size, 6'5", 310 pounds, but he's fundamentally sound. He's not a stiff 6'5", 310 pounds. He's a guy who bends his knees, he blocks with leverage, uses his hands well, shows ability out on the second level, terrific in pass protection. He's got some dominant strength at the point of attack. Would like to see him develop a little bit more of a nasty streak. But I think when you look at a guy that's got size, that's got the ability to bend, that's got flexibility, that's decent on his feet, I think Wanahago really measures up to the expectations that scouts have put on him at this point in time, which is he's going to be a first-round pick in 2020.
Yeah, the most recent in the royalty that comes from the Auburn offensive line. Remember, that's where King Dunlap went. So you got a King a few years ago, and now you got a Prince this year. An intriguing player, very smooth athlete. I like what I saw from Prince Wanago. All right, I'm going to go another SEC team, obviously Vanderbilt. They got a running back, Keyshawn Vaughn, a transfer from Illinois, went there last year and didn't start the season as a starter, but took over and was just a big play machine. This guy could take it the distance anytime he touches the football, whether it's the run game or the pass game, can erase good angles in space from defenders and just run away from the pack. Really, really impressive player. I want to see him really come back and have a full season and do it again. And so that might be a lot to ask, but a really intriguing player. I like to see him get a little bit better in pass pro too. But in terms of a game breaker, there aren't a lot of guys in the country where I say, man, like that guy's more explosive than Keyshawn Vaughn.
Yeah, I did one of his games last year against Florida, and he actually got injured. But before that, I think he had a 75-yard run, another 70-yard screen as well. I was just very excited for him. I didn't know a whole lot about him, but they have a bunch of returning seniors that are intriguing. Also, receiver Kalijah Lipscomb, who I think was top 5 in yards, touchdowns, catches in the SEC last year. But the tight end, Jared Pinkney, is very interesting. He's 6'4", 260, has an unofficial 4'6", 4'7" type of 40. He looks like, I'm not saying he plays like, but he looks like that Antonio Gates type of body. He's a little bit doughy, a little bit thick, has that kind of bubble on his butt and his lower legs, but he runs very well, has very soft hands, is just that QB's best friend on third down and make those gritty, tough catches in traffic, going down low, can pluck it down low by his ankles. He's experienced in that pro-style scheme, great on those play-action elements, whether it's the over routes or the little slip routes, has enough wiggle and athleticism in the open field to make defenders miss after the catch. He's just somebody I think is what the NFL really wants out of their tight end position. He can hang with him in line. He's got the size and the toughness, but he also has the soft hands. I just think he's a very well-rounded tight end. What's looking like kind of a down tight end year in the SEC, I'm not really sure who's going to be the dominant player.
Yeah, it's that's an interesting group of offensive skill talent there at Vanderbilt this year. We'll see with Derek Mason.
50 catches last year as well, which when you're talking tight ends in college, you really don't see the players get over that 50 catch threshold.
No doubt. All right, well, let's move now to underclassmen in the SEC on the offensive side of the ball. A litany of options, to say the least. A lot of players that we could pick from here, but who is the top offensive underclassman in your mind, Tony?
Well, I got two that are neck and neck, obviously both from Alabama, Tua Tagovailoa and Jerry Jeudy, who was mentioned before. I have Tagovailoa slightly ahead of Jeudy. I know there are some scouts that like Jeudy ahead of Tagovailoa because of his game-breaking skills. I think both guys are going to enter the draft. I think assuming there are no injuries, I think both guys are going to be early first-round picks. I think Tagovailoa is more of a system type of quarterback because of the lack of height, but I think he's going to do very well at the next level. Jeudy doesn't have the great size, but again, you're looking at a guy that's versatile. You can line him up in the slot. You can line him up in the flanks, get him off of press coverage, can also be a return specialist for you. I think both of these guys are game-breaking players on the offensive side of the ball. And because of that, they're going to be top 15 selections in the 2020 draft.
I think when you look at Tua, and we could talk about him a little bit. I think when you look at him, certainly he's short, so that's going to be a knock. But he's 230 pounds. He's built like Russell Wilson to me, and just the way that he throws the football, very smooth, very compact, very efficient with his release. He's athletic and can create in the backfield. His arm talent is there. He can drive the football. He's pretty accurate. I would say not as accurate as people would say. His ball placement's good, not great. But ultimately, when you look at him, we've talked about the supporting cast and the receivers and the run game. The offensive line was good last year. Everything was pretty well defined for him. The scheme was really good. Mike Loxley and Josh Gaddis and the rest of that scheme. A lot of turnover now with the run game, a lot of turnover on the coaching staff. They've lost some offensive linemen. I want to see how he rebounds this year. And, can he finish or can he get back to where he was early last season? Because remember, down the stretch, he was banged up, and he wasn't outstanding against some of the best defenses, right? So Clemson, LSU, Georgia, he wasn't as effective as he was early in the season. So I'm excited to see Tua now with the changes they've made from a staff standpoint, from a personnel standpoint. How is he going to look this year with a new-look offense? It's going to be very, very interesting to watch. Very talented passer that I'm excited to see with his second year as a starter. My guy, I'm going to pick DeAndre Swift, a Philly kid, St. Joe's Prep here in Philadelphia, 5'9", 215 pounds. This kid's a dynamic playmaker. Pass game, run game, doesn't matter. I like his vision. I like his competitiveness. I'd like to see him get a little bit better at pass protection as a blocker. But overall, this kid is really, really fun to watch. I think he's got the ability to be a primary ball carrier. Even though he's a little bit smaller, he's not just a change of pace guy. DeAndre Swift is really fun to watch.
Well, I'm glad you steered us over to the Dogs down in Georgia, because I think one of the anomalies of college football and the transition in the NFL is, why does the University of Georgia not produce top-flight offensive linemen? They're pumping out running backs year after year, from Todd Gurley and Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and Holyfield last year, and obviously DeAndre Swift coming up now. But I think they finally have one, and that's Andrew Thomas, who's 6'5", 320, started every game at right tackle as a true freshman, every game at left tackle last season. And I just keep noting number 71 when I was studying these kids last year, whether it was Nick Chubb or Sony Michel or Holyfield this past draft, at 71, 71, 71. Somebody is blocking for these running backs, and I think we need to give some attention. I think they finally have a player that's long, strong, nasty, and has the power to really transition to the NFL game. I think Andrew Thomas is finally that player that could be in a first-round discussion.
It's not common that we'll see blue chip underclassmen go back to school, but I feel like when we're talking about the top defensive seniors in the SEC, there are a number of blue chip players in this conference that are still seniors that went back for another year. Tony, who is the number one? Who's the top defensive senior in the SEC in your mind?
Hands down on my board, it's Derek Brown, the defensive lineman from Auburn. I had him graded as a first rounder coming off the 2017 film after his sophomore season. I thought he improved last year. I thought had he entered last year's draft, he would have been a top 15 pick. I know that he's one of the highest rated players from some of the scouting services who grade him as a mid-first round choice. 6'4", 325 pounds. When you see a guy that big, you think of someone who's a gap occupier, someone who just takes on blocks. Not Derek Brown. He can rush the passer. He can stuff the run. He can change direction and get down the line of scrimmage to make plays in space. He's incredibly athletic. He's very explosive. Fundamentally sound, too. He just doesn't do it with natural gifts, just by overpowering lesser competition. He bends his knees. He plays with leverage. He uses his hands well. I think right now, as we're moving towards the 2020 draft, if Derek Brown has the season that we all expect him to, I think he's going to be a top 10 pick next April.
Well, it seems like the consensus is between Derek Brown and senior D-tackle Raekwon Davis over at University of Alabama, who's 6'7", 315. And
freak show.
We know the Ashawn Robinsons and Jerron Reeds and Jonathan Allen, Daron Paynes, all very good players, but this guy's built in just a different mold. He's very, very long, every bit of 6'6", 6'7", 35-inch arms, 85-inch wingspan, which is obviously inches above those other players. He's a three-tech style player that'll project, to the NFL. He's got the length, he's got the power, very heavy hands, but he doesn't fly into gaps or backfields. But that's just how the scheme is at Alabama. It's not a single gap, get up the field scheme. It's a lot of square stance, hold your gap, stack and shed your players, play the run on the way to the pass. Defensive scheme there. So a lot of questions on what his acclimate will be in rushing the pass to the NFL, but just because he's not asked to do it at Alabama, it doesn't mean he can't do it. And I just think he's built in a much different mold than these other Alabama tackles.
He reminds me a lot of DeForest Buckner coming out of Oregon, to a T.
That's going to be the comp I think that's going to be thrown around, that long torso, 6'6", 6'7" frame.
Yeah, and Buckner, or Davis rather, he didn't have a lot of sack production last year. Quinnen kind of cleaned that up. But 2 years ago, I want to say he had 8 sacks.
8.5 in 2017.
Yeah, he was a very productive player a couple of years ago, but does need to come along as a pass rusher. I love Raekwon Davis. I like Derek Brown a lot too. But I'll tell you what, man. Trey, we talked a couple weeks ago when we did the Big Ten about Jeffrey Okudah and how he was a better corner than anybody in this past draft. I would say the same thing about Alabama's corner, Trayvon Diggs, a senior, the younger brother of Stephon Diggs. Yep, another Maryland kid. Former receiver, got to Alabama as a receiver for obvious reasons, felt that I might be able to make more money on the defensive side of the football. This kid's got size, he's got strength, he's athletic, he's got ball skills. I'd like to see him get a little bit better from an instinctive standpoint, in their zone coverage schemes and the things that they do from that standpoint. But let me paint you this picture. He missed 9 games last year, so he didn't play a full season. That might be why he went back. But when you watch him against Ole Miss, he pitched a shutout against DK Metcalf. Any plays that Metcalf made in that game, they were when this kid was somewhere else on the field. He struggled not just to run away from Diggs, but also even to out-muscle. And we know what kind of physical stature DK Metcalf was. Stephon Diggs was latched onto this kid. I was really, really impressed with Trayvon Diggs. He's a guy that, to me, has a really high upside, and another year playing for Nick Saban, who we know can develop DBs as well as anybody. To me, I look at this kid as having a really, really high ceiling. All right, let's talk about some defensive underclassmen. Tony, who's the top defensive underclassmen in the SEC? Because there are always some gems down there from that standpoint on that side of the ball.
In my opinion, it's Grant Delpit, and there's no question about it. I mean, this guy is phenomenal. He reminds me of Jamal Adams with much better ball skills.
Wow.
He shows the forcefulness against the run and up the field that Jamal Adams shows, but he's also much better over the slot receiver. He's much better in center field. He's great when the ball is in the air. I mean, there really aren't too many flaws in this guy's game when I watched him, except sometimes he's a little bit late reacting. But those are few and far between. Outstanding size. He's going to measure in about 6'2", 200 pounds, 205 pounds. I expect him to run in the 4.4s as a safety. Really, I mean, we spoke last week about Isaiah Simmons. Grant Delpit just takes it to another level as far as I'm concerned. I already have him graded as a top 15 selection, or my grade is reflective of a top 15 selection. I love this guy's complete game. And I think he's got a tremendous amount of upside.
So I talked to a few players at the Combine about Delpit. First of all, Ben, you named him as your down-the-road freak show last October when you did their game. But I talked with Jay Sternberger, said Delpit was the best player he faced last year, no question about it. Was really, really tough to match up with. But then I talked with a couple of his teammates. Greedy Williams talked about he was a guy that you could line up. It was almost like the Derwin James conversation. Like, line this guy up anywhere on the field, corner, DN, linebacker, safety, in the slot. He's going to win. He's going to figure out a way to make a play. And I talked with John Battle, who was actually a senior safety. He was at the Combine last year. I don't think he was drafted, but John Battle was a veteran in that secondary and said, look, when Delpit first got there, he was still kind of figuring out, wasn't fully confident. And once he figured it out, this kid was just making plays last year. You see the range, his ability to make plays along the sideline. And again, just kind of reiterated what Greedy said in that he can line up in the post, he can line up in the box, in the slot, out wide, wherever you need him. Delpit was there to make plays, a guy that I'm really, really excited to dive into.
I feel really confident about my comparison for Grant Delpit, and that's Minka Fitzpatrick, who I think played all over the field, inside, outside safety, but they have similar body types.
Yeah.
A little more upright, skinny legs, a little bit skinnier waist, doesn't really have that thick barrel chest like most safeties do, like maybe like a Jamal Adams does, a little squattier, a little stronger. But I think where he lacks in the strength, he makes up with his quick-footed and his coverage ability to break on balls.
Do you think we're going to have that same conversation about, like, and this is both of you guys, do you think we're going to have that same conversation with Delpit if he is moved around so much for LSU this year about, all right, well, what position is he? How do you value this guy that we talked about with guys like Minka and Derwin and Jalen Ramsey had the same conversation? Those guys have all turned into good players, though. I don't know if we're going to still keep having that same conversation.
Well, yeah. I think Delpit's ball skills are much better than Derwin James. No doubt about it in my book. It just helps Delpit. It's just going to increase his value. And I don't know that you're ever going to be able to line him up as a pure cornerback, but I absolutely think you can put him over the slot receiver as a safety, and he's not a liability.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think those cover safeties is really becoming a highly touted position in the NFL. And just to round out my opinion, this category, which Fran initially labeled as intriguing defensive underclassmen.
That's
so
right,
it may not be my top, but an intriguing player is Alabama safety Xavier McKinney, who is kind of in that Ronnie Harrison mold, and he can come down and be that dime linebacker, but also plays in the back end. He was the MVP of the Orange Bowl. So had some great games against Oklahoma, even in the Clemson game that they got blown out. He's shown he could cover the move tight ends like Grant Calcaterra. He's shown he could cover the slot receivers like a Hunter Renfrow. So I think having that coverage ability, the fact he's been in that dime linebacker role, he's a good tackler, running the alley, can trigger very well, breaks down. He's a secure tackler, has the coverage skill. So very interesting player that's been on the field quite a bit, also wearing that number 15 like Ronnie Harrison did. So he's just a similar mold. I think Jacksonville's pretty happy with Ronnie Harrison down there.
I would say so. All right, Tony, let's get to a sleeper in the SEC. Those can be tough to find, but who's a guy that's flying under the radar a little bit in that conference?
Well, it's a guy that you mentioned before, Trevon Diggs. And the only reason I say he's a sleeper is because of what you mentioned. He missed 9 games last season.
Yep.
And, I mean, a lot of people don't know about him. But what you said, when he was on the field, he was a dominant force at cornerback. There's no doubt about it. He's got exceptional size. He's going to measure over 6'1". You know, he doesn't look very fast, but he's estimated to run in the low 4.4s, the high 4.3s. So he gets it motoring. What I love about Diggs when I watched him play was he is as adept making plays with his back to the ball and getting his head back around to locate the pass in the air as he is facing the action. And that's a difficult thing for a lot of college cornerbacks. You know, you see a lot of face guarding, guys who try and just physically beat down the opponents. They play the ball, they play the hands of the receiver rather than playing the ball. You know, not Diggs. Last year, when Savion Smith, the cornerback from Alabama, entered the draft, it was a surprise to people. But what people in Alabama who I'm close with told me, they said the reason Savion Smith entered the draft is if he had returned to Alabama, he wouldn't have been a starter. He may have been the number 3 or 4 cornerback on the depth chart, so he had to enter the draft.
Interesting.
And they were, and that was because Diggs was injured. Now, you know, if right now I have him graded as a second-round pick because I want to see some durability. I want to see some, some of the details improved. But if he's healthy and he plays the way he's capable, Diggs is going to be a mid-first round choice. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's a great player out there. And just like if you were to go down to Alabama and ask them if he's a sleeper, they'd probably say no. Yeah. Just like my player at LSU, you go down and you say, hey, is Patrick Queen a sleeper?
Right.
Probably not. But the country, I think he's a sleeper. This is the linebacker behind Devin White that's going to come in and take a lot of those playmaking opportunities that Devin White, took advantage of the past 2 and 3 years at LSU. But this kid's 6'2", every bit of 230, explosive, fast, can move sideline to sideline, has some coverage instincts, but he's a nasty thumper, and when he gets there with some attitude. I expect Patrick Queen to be in the kind of conversation of being one of the bigger playmakers in college football.
I'm going to stay in the front 7. I'm going to go to Tennessee, and I'm going to go with Daryl Taylor, who's 6'3", just under 260. To me, when you look at this kid, he was very productive last year. He had 8 or 10 sacks, was the team MVP. And as I'm doing work on him, and I'm watching him, and then I'm reading the background and getting the whole history on this kid, I couldn't help but think about a year ago when we were talking about Josh Allen and coming out of Kentucky. That year, you're talking about him. He's like, hey, look, he was a high school wide receiver, didn't play a ton of football, especially on the defensive side. And if it wasn't at defensive end, but really was productive, just needs to come along in the fine-tuning of his game, held up against the run, but wasn't a fully polished pass rusher yet. That's kind of what I see here with Daryl Taylor. Now, we know what happened with Josh Allen. Josh Allen went on and had an outstanding senior season, was even more productive than he was as a junior, had a number of clutch moments, becomes a top 10 pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll see if Daryl Taylor could have that same kind of arc, but I think at the same point a year ago, you're talking about a guy who was a high school men's basketball player, played receiver and linebacker in high school, didn't even play all 4 years, football in high school. I think when you're looking at him from a total big picture standpoint, that's the comparison you can make. I want to see him continue to polish, really improve his overall pass rush plan. But an intriguing player that I think has got a skill set that you can work with there off the edge from Tennessee. All right, Tony, what player has the most to prove from the SEC? Maybe he's coming off injury. Maybe he's coming off a little bit of an underwhelming season. A guy that you want to see really kind of take the next step here this fall.
Well, it's someone coming off injury. That would be Terrell Lewis of Alabama, who,
stud. Yep.
Off the 2017 film, looked like a terrific 3-4 outside linebacker, was a pass rusher, very athletic. I graded him as a third-round pick. Suffered a significant knee injury last July. Missed all of the 2018 season. From what I read and what I was told, they limited him in spring practice. So we have to see where he is with that knee injury. At the top of his game, he's a guy that, if he plays up to expectation, is going to be a top 75 selection. But the fact is now he's got a red flag medically. You got to see how he rebounds, where he's at, if he's able to get back to where he was, his level of play in 2017. and improve upon that. So for all those reasons, the guy that I got the most to prove is Terrell Lewis of Alabama.
So I had two players written down here, and I might as well stick with the one also coming off injury, and that's Clavon Chasen. I think it's Clavon. K''Lavon. Clavon Chasen from LSU, who is touted to replace Arden Key off the edge and hunt all those quarterbacks in the SEC. He played the Miami game, the opener last year, dominant performance, ended up hurting his leg late in the fourth quarter and missed the rest of the season. So I think he's somebody coming off an injury that's really going to surprise people and has a lot to prove. But the other name I had written down was Jake Bentley at South Carolina. Left high school early, came out after his junior year. I feel like he's been down there forever, son of a coach, and just has never really developed his game and has been that consistent player that we expected him to be, being one of the top quarterbacks in the country. And he has all the tools. He has the arm strength. He has the size. He has the experience. He has the weapons on the outside, Brian Edwards and Shea Smith and all those guys. So I just want to see him put it all together and come up with a strong season down in South Carolina, which they're just dying for consistency on the offensive side.
Yeah, I remember a few weeks ago we had Tony Rasiopi on, who was at the Manning Passing Academy, said that Bentley was the most improved player he saw from last year to this year. So hopefully he can make that same jump on the field.
I know he came off the field a little bit last year. I'm not sure if he was dinged up or if they benched him to get settled. I know Dante Scarnecchia's kid came in for a little bit. But
the players there, like every South Carolina kid I talked to, like loved this kid. Like they vouch for him to a T. So I don't think it's a matter of the leadership standpoint. And I know he's been starting for a few years now.
We just expect more out of him. Those guys that have been there early on, we just want to see their game develop and refine and just polish all those kind of loose ends.
So I got to admit something. Coming into this podcast, I was terrified of the idea of Tony trying to pronounce this player's name that I'm getting ready to bring up. And that's Albert Okoye, the talented redshirt junior tight end from Missouri, 6'5", 260 pounds. No one's really talking about this kid. He was the foundation of that Missouri offense last year with Drew Lock. I mean, he was the number one receiver for all intents and purposes. The passing game funneled through this kid, was really productive, was a finalist for the Mackey Award as the top tight end in the country. He's athletic. He's got great ball skills. He can create his own separation, make plays after the catch. I think when you look at him, he's a willing blocker. He's just not great at the point of attack right now. I'd like to see him get a little bit better there. He was a little bit dinged up last year. They had the other senior there, Kendall Blanton, so there was a 12 personnel offense, and he was more the blocker, whereas Okoye was more of the receiver. Can he be more of a complete player? Can he kind of step up and be that 3-down player early on? People have questions about that with tight ends in today's game. Can he be that guy? That's the big question he's going to prove. Regardless, I think this kid's going to be a much higher pick than people are talking about right now.
He might have been in the conversation for a top 5 tight end, maybe just after Irv Smith or there in last year's draft if he came out.
No, I think you're exactly right.
A couple interesting things on him. You can actually go onto YouTube and find the pronunciation of his name. I can't even pronunciate. So, so I tried to practice that. He's a smart kid, and he wants to be a doctor, which is one of the reasons why he chose not to enter last year's draft, because he's got some academic aspirations. We'll have to see, how that mixes in with his football future. I agree with you. I believe he had a shoulder injury, if I'm not mistaken, towards the end of last year, which kind of hampered him. Yeah, and he's been a big-time player really since he stepped on the field for Missouri. It's just a matter of, is he going to go the football route or is he going to go the medical school route? We'll see what happens.
All right, well, let's wrap things up here with the SEC. The newcomer of the year. Who's the guy that is new to the conference that, for one reason or another, whether it's transfer or a guy that's stepping in for a starter, that's new to the spotlight, that's really going to stand out? Tony, who you got?
Last week at the ACC, I talked about a Virginia Tech kid who transferred to Miami and Trevon Hill. This week, I'm going to talk about a Miami kid who transferred to Georgia, receiver Lawrence Cager, fifth-year senior, 6'4", 215 pounds. Basically, the Georgia receiving corps was cleaned out due to graduation. They were all drafted or signed as priority free agents. We saw a bunch of them at the Shrine Game at the Senior Bowl. So Jake Fromm's going to need some big targets to throw the ball to, and Lawrence Cager is one of those guys. I mean, he's got an outstanding catching radius. Really wasn't all that productive at Miami or Florida. Right now is being stamped as a better athlete than he is a football player. But when you get a receiver that size, 6'4", 215 pounds, not the fastest guy in the world, you got to keep an eye on him. So he's a guy that is got a wait and see type of grade. I think he's going to have his opportunities at Georgia because Georgia's going to want to make another run at the SEC title with some of their higher rated juniors who are expected to enter the draft after the season. I think Cage is in line for potentially a big season, which will only help his draft grade.
Yeah, and they had the Cal transfer, Demetrius Robinson, a year ago, who made an impact for them. Georgia, a lot of talent returning at the wide receiver position, really on offense in general. I'm going to throw mine in here. I talked with Mississippi State safety Jonathan Abram, a future first-round pick, ended up going in the first round to Oakland this past spring. But talked with Jonathan Abram. I said, all right, who's next? Who's the big guy that no one's talking about with the Bulldogs right now that we will be a year from now? He told me Fred Peters, and I kind of looked at him. I was like, who's Fred Peters? He's never played a down for Mississippi State. He's a junior college transfer that just arrived there this past year. And Abrams said this kid's a freak show. He had 6 picks a year ago for junior college. All of them went for touchdowns. He's going to be an impact player in the secondary for Mississippi State. So I'm going to take Jonathan Abrams' word for it. I'm going to go with Fred Peters here.
With all this movement at the quarterback position, it's so easy for somebody to just be a one-hit wonder, catch fire in a bottle, and suddenly be an NFL prospect.
Yeah.
And I think Riley Neal, 6'6" quarterback from Ball State, who's now at Vanderbilt, has all the opportunity and all the parts around him to really have that one giant season and put himself into that conversation and maybe be an NFL quarterback. We had mentioned earlier with all those seniors around him, Keyshawn Vaughn at the running back position, Pinckney at tight end, Kalijah Lipscomb at receiver, very pro-style system. He's going to put his hands under center just like Kyle Shermer did for those 3 and 4 years, son of Pat Shermer. He's going to turn his back to the defense. He's a little bit in that Paxton Lynch type of mold from the University of Memphis, who kind of fizzled out with Denver, but I could really see him having one strong season. He's every bit of 6'6" with a strong arm with those seniors around him. That's kind of the recipe for a big year.
That's all the tools are there for success.
No question. And you run through the SEC, obviously that perks up scouts just a little bit more, and if you could have success down there, I think we got something.
Interesting.
And Neal was a good quarterback at Ball State. I mean, I give him a draftable grade. There were some scouts that think he's a 6th, 7th round selection. I believe he had injury issues last year and didn't finish out the season. But if you watched him his sophomore and junior season, I wrote about him entering the 2018 season.
You did.
I gave him a draftable grade off of his sophomore year. He has all the tools. You're going to be limited playing at Ball State. And like I said, I believe I have to go back and look that he struggled with injuries last year. But if he puts it all together, I mean, he's the type of guy that I think could make a significant move up draft boards. The type of guy, especially with the depletion of senior quarterbacks that we could see in the postseason at either the Shrine Game or possibly the Senior Bowl, depending on how well he plays.
And just the landscape of quarterbacks transferring and just having a new scenery, new coaching staff, the opportunity just to work with new players around you, and you catch fire in a bottle in that 1 year, suddenly you're a prospect and getting everybody's attention and interest. So I think he has kind of all the parts around him to be that player for the 2020 draft.
Yeah, big free agent addition for Vanderbilt. We'll see. Well, I think we've got a couple next week that we'll be talking about. Until then, Tony, appreciate the time here as always on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, just a really fun chat with those two guys, again, covering some of the top players from around the SEC. A lot of guys we didn't even cover that we will be covering, obviously, in the weeks to come. And I can't tell you guys how excited I am for year 2 of this thing, where it's a year-round ordeal on the Journey to the Draft podcast. And this coming season, in the next couple of weeks, because remember, college football, just a couple of weeks away. Once things get started, Ben's going to be out on the road every week. We're going to be breaking down players with both him and with Tony. We'll have guests. It's going to be a lot of fun. Exactly what we did last year from a certain angle, but we're going to throw in some additions in there as well. So really excited to get things going. And again, the number one way to support this show is to go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen, and give us that rating, give us that comment, because that way it gets boosted up the rankings. The show is more visible to other people that are looking for the same kind of content. So if you want to give us a little bit of a shout out on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, you'd go, takes 2 seconds, go leave us that rating, helps boost us up the list a little bit, gets our listener count up, and now everybody's happy. So really appreciate any support that you can give us. And again, one thing you can do if you really liked this episode and you missed some of the last few weeks, you can go back, check last week. We had the ACC preview with Ben and Tony. Also, we talked with NFL Network analyst Daniel Jeremiah. The week before, we did the Big Ten. Ross Tucker was with us, and we broke down some of the top prospects for Penn State, if you're a local fan. So really a lot of players we've discussed as we approach the 2019 season. Really appreciate the time from all of our guests over the last couple of weeks. But I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll see you next week here for another edition of the show.